So Alec Baldwin believes a gun can shoot without pulling a trigger.
How dare you!
Hello, my name is Todd. I want to thank you for tuning back into the Teal Jack channel one more time. I greatly appreciate you watching one of my videos and taking time out of your day. So what I'm discussing today is a piece of footage that I ran across today, a trailer, if you would, for the George Stephanopoulos interview of Alec Baldwin post the shooting of Alec Baldwin's movie Rust.
You've described it as a 1 in a trillion shot, and the gun was in your hand. How do you come to terms with that? It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
So as you see in the clip, Alec Baldwin says he never pulled the trigger. I'd never point a firearm at someone and pull the trigger. It doesn't matter exactly what he said or how he stated it. It's the simple aspect that he believes the gun went off, I guess miraculously on its own. Now, I cannot show you a single action army as I don't own one, but I do have this really old 32 revolver, and just so everybody knows, there's no rounds in it. The chamber's completely clear. It's been unloaded for years. In fact, I've never shot this. This is my wife's great-grandma's firearm. And with all the original bluing still on it, it's hardly been shot at all, if at all. This has no hammer. It's an internal hammer. So I can't exactly show you how a single action army works. I also have this one. This is a Glock 27. Also, no rounds in it. Completely unloaded. There is no rounds in this firearm at all. So I can't exactly show you how this one functions to a degree, because again, there's no hammer. This is called a striker fire. So I can't exactly show you with the firearms that I own how a single action army works. The basic function of the Colt single action army has their hammer back here. You pull the hammer, it goes to one cock, that's called the half cock, under which you can spin your cylinder and load in the rounds from a chamber that would be located on the right side of the firearm. This one, of course, breaks open and you load them in one at a time into the cylinder at the top. The single action army doesn't break open. It has a little gate that opens up here, and you slide the rounds in, you turn it, slide around in, turn it, slide around and turn it, until you load up 6 rounds, or 5 rounds if you want to be safe, because the hammer will protrude into the firing chamber, and you could potentially set off a 6th round should the hammer land on the primer. Then you would pull it back into the full cock position, and then you'd pull the trigger and it would shoot. Now, the problem with his statement that he never pulled the trigger, everything I've seen in the Colt single action army, which this is not, everything I have seen and everything I've read about, the gun can't go off until you pull the trigger. And that's the way most firearms operate. They won't go off till you pull the trigger. And in some cases, like the Glock 27, it won't go off till this little detent in the trigger is pushed and then the trigger is pulled. So, could there be another way the gun could have gone off without pulling the trigger? Sure. Yeah, there have been numerous cases of firearms, new and old, going off with the hammer cocked or a striker fire like this one, with it loaded and the slide was racked, And so the round is armed and the striker's back ready to fire, and you drop the gun on the ground and it goes off. But most modern day firearms like this Glock are heavily tested so that literally you could drop them and the firearm won't go off. In fact, I've actually dropped my Ruger LC9 fully loaded, fully cocked, so to speak, because it's also striker fire. The safety was on and the gun didn't go off. Not that I would be an advocate for dropping a firearm, but it can happen. So can the Colt Single Action Army go off if dropped? Well, that'd be a wonderful test. I'd love to demonstrate for you, but again, I don't own one. And at the price of some of the old Colt Single Action Armies out there, I can't afford one. And that would lead me to have to buy a newer one. And it wouldn't be a Colt, it'd probably be an off-brand like a Ruger, which are gonna be less money than actually buying a Colt Single Action Army in its current production. Bottom of the line is I can't test it for you. I can't tell you. But what I do know is there would have been several things that have had to go wrong with that firearm in order for it to go off without pulling the trigger. One of them being a malfunction in the sear or the sear spring. That could potentially lead to the hammer falling on its own spring power and setting off the primer. But I would have to argue, based off of what I know of firearms and firearm safety, that firearm would not have gone off had he not pulled the trigger. Now, I'm not there, or I wasn't there, so I can't tell you that's not exactly what he did. I'm just telling you from a perspective of somebody who's shot quite a few different firearms. They just don't go off on their own. I've had one on my hip for a while, fully loaded. It has never gone off on its own. Again, I don't own the Colt Single Action Army, so I can't speak to that one. That would be one for those who own one to tell you. But from what I can gather, it will not go off until you've cocked that hammer back and then pulled the trigger. Now, if the hammer wasn't cocked, the firearm would not have gone off as long as the hammer itself wasn't sitting down onto the primer of a round in the chamber. It just can't go off because the cocking of the hammer is what rotates the cylinder to allow a new round to come up to the chamber of the barrel. It's a newer day and I've been editing this video to post for you guys, and I noticed that I need to give some additional information that could be quite helpful in understanding the Colt Single Action Army around this Alec Baldwin incident. And that is the Single Action Army, and I would venture to guess some of the other older revolvers could have the potential or the ability to discharge without pulling a trigger. And one way that could happen is having a round in the chamber and then the hammer is down and it applies enough pressure on that round that, yeah, it could potentially cause the gun to go off without pulling the trigger.
Kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
He's admitting he cocked the gun. And that's an issue. So I don't have a firearm that's a Colt Single Action Army. All I can show you is this Ruger SR22. Again, there are no rounds in this firearm, none in the chamber at all. And what I can do with this one is kind of show you a cocking hammer. This is the only firearm I own that has a hammer. Now, this gun has a safety with a decocker built into it. So when it's on fire, which red is dead, so it's on fire, the hammer when pulled back will lock. And it made a series of clicks as it went to lock, and by pulling the safety back down, it will decock the hammer. and it won't go off in this case. Although I always, when I go to decock this particular firearm and there's a round in the chamber, I personally always aim it at the ground, just for that little extra safety precaution, just in case something would happen here mechanically. Now, the Colt Single Action Army also has a series of clicks, 4 of them, to my knowledge, when you cock the hammer to get it to do various stages. Now, I don't know how far back he pulled that hammer and then, as he said, released it, and then the gun went off. I'm not so sure how he's describing it. It could happen that way without a pull of the trigger. From what I've seen and my understanding of the Colt Single Action Army, you're going to pull it back. It's going to go pretty quickly to a first click, the half cock position. So my understanding on how that firearm operates, he must have pulled the hammer all the way back. And the only way it could have gone off when he released the hammer was by pulling the trigger, or by holding the trigger and pulling the hammer and then releasing the hammer. Hammer flies forward and the gun goes off. I'm just assuming. I'm not there. I don't have my hands on the actual firearm, so I can't test its functionality to see if there's some mechanical problem with that particular firearm, to see if his story lines up. So I'm likely to lean on the side that he could have had his finger on the trigger when he pulled that hammer back, and when he released the hammer goes down, the gun goes bang. But what this definitely does show is he didn't take the time to check the firearm himself and to make sure that there were no live rounds in that firearm. My understanding is he thought it just had dummy rounds in it. Well, firearm safety should dictate you never aim a firearm at somebody, and he himself admitted that people there said the gun was aimed at her. And so it just seems like a simple case of those 4 basic rules of firearm safety were not followed, and thus Hutchins has lost her life. I just think this one more time is Alec Baldwin trying to make an excuse for a negligent discharge of a firearm that resulted in someone's death. Those are my 2 thoughts. Firearms don't go off without pulling a trigger, typically speaking, and therefore I personally would have to conclude, sitting behind a camera in my safety of my own home, that Alec Baldwin more than likely pulled the trigger. And now he's just trying to make up an excuse because I think he could be legally held liable. Those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Love to hear from you. Take care. God bless. We'll catch you next time. If you've made it this far in my video, I sincerely thank you for taking time out of your day to watch the entirety of my video. If you like my content, please hit the like button and turn your bell on. You'll receive a notification anytime I post a new video. Also, if you wouldn't mind, hit the subscribe button. You'll find the link up here. And feel free to watch one of my other videos that I will have pointed over here. Thanks again for taking time out of your day. It really does mean a lot that you would spend part of your day and your valuable time to watch one of my videos. Take care. God bless. We'll see you next time.